Let us consider for a moment the profound impact that absence has on human relationships. It's easy to overlook the quiet power of withdrawal, of stepping back, refraining from contact, and reframing the ways in which we communicate with those around us. When you stop texting, when you stop calling, when you step away from the constant flow of communication, something fundamental shifts. When you stop texting and calling someone, especially in a relationship where communication has been frequent and habitual, you introduce a powerful force into the dynamic, the force of absence. Absence, in its most potent form, creates a void that cannot be ignored. It's not simply the lack of words or interaction, it is an emotional and psychological space that holds its own weight and influence. People are deeply affected by the absence of something they once took for granted, and this absence, while seemingly passive, brings an active shift in behavior, mindset, and response. When communication halts, the mind and emotions of the person being left in silence begin to fill the void. They do so by reflecting on the relationship themselves and the reasons behind the change. In the absence of the usual patterns of interaction, there is no immediate reassurance of where things stand. This forces the individual to confront their own feelings of uncertainty. Where before there was regular contact, now there is a profound silence, and in that silence, questions arise. What went wrong? Why the sudden distance? These questions are not merely about the external change in behavior, but they often reflect a deeper internal dialogue about one's self-worth, role in the relationship, and fears of rejection. This absence, then, does not just communicate the absence of physical contact, it communicates a shift in the relationship's dynamics, often forcing the individual to reassess their own actions and the nature of the connection they had. What happens when you stop reaching out is that it forces the other person to acknowledge what they may have taken for granted. It might bring to the surface an awareness of how much they relied on your presence and communication to define their emotional equilibrium. The absence, in essence, acts as a mirror, showing them a reflection of their dependence or perhaps their neglect. In this silence, they must face questions that might otherwise have gone unnoticed. Am I putting in enough effort? What does this person really mean to me? Am I being fair or considerate in this relationship? For some, this period of absence will trigger an emotional response that can range from confusion to anxiety. The longer the silence persists, the more these feelings intensify. What was once comfortable and routine now becomes an enigma. This uncertainty can become uncomfortable, even painful. The absence itself might feel like a loss, forcing the individual to consider the possibility of being abandoned or forgotten. Such fear can give rise to emotional insecurity, and in some cases prompt a response based on fear rather than clarity. The desire to regain control over the situation might lead to attempts at re-establishing contact, but not always from a place of healthy curiosity. Often, these responses are driven by the anxiety of not knowing where they stand and the fear of emotional isolation. But absence is not solely a destructive force. It can also be a source of clarity, forcing people to rethink their priorities and reestablish their sense of self. It allows the individual to step back from the emotional noise and reassess what is truly important, both in terms of the relationship and their own personal development. The silence might serve as a much-needed reset, one that enables both individuals to better understand their emotional needs and boundaries. In this sense, absence does not only highlight what is lacking, but it also brings to light the necessity for balance, self-sufficiency, and emotional maturity within relationships. The ability to be present with oneself, even in the absence of constant interaction, is a profound strength that underpins any healthy relationship. When communication stops, especially in a relationship where contact has been frequent, the absence of interaction forces a person into a space of self-reflection. Without the usual flow of messages, calls, or exchanges, an individual is suddenly confronted with their own thoughts and emotions in a way they might have avoided previously. In this silence, the mind begins to wander, and the individual is left with nothing but their internal dialogue to fill the void. They are no longer distracted by the immediacy of communication, and the absence creates an opportunity for introspection. This is where the process of self-reflection truly begins. With the usual external feedback from the other person removed, the individual is compelled to turn inward. They start asking themselves questions that may have been pushed aside in the rush of daily life or the constant rhythm of interaction. What is my role in this relationship? Have I been giving enough? Have I been taking too much? How do I contribute to the emotional dynamics between us? These questions often surface when there is no longer the comfort of constant reassurance or the distraction of ongoing conversations. The absence serves as a mirror, showing the person a reflection of themselves that is often more honest than the one they would prefer to see. When communication is regular, there's often an external validation that takes place, the reassurance that they are being heard, appreciated, or desired. But in the absence of that external validation, there's nothing left to rely on but one's own sense of self-worth. And for some, this is a challenging experience. They may begin to question their value in the relationship. They wonder if they are being missed, if they are important, if their absence will be noticed or even felt. These feelings can reveal much about a person's self-worth and their ability to define themselves independent of others. If their sense of value is heavily tied to the approval or attention of another, the absence can feel like a profound blow. It may trigger feelings of inadequacy or fear of rejection. The silence can bring up insecurities that were previously masked by the routine of interaction. In such moments, the person may realize that their sense of self-worth is fragile, reliant more on the external than on the internal, and this realization can be both enlightening and painful. On the other hand, the absence can also serve as an opportunity for growth. When stripped of the usual sources of validation, a person has the chance to reconnect with themselves in a deeper way. They are given the space to examine who they are outside the confines of the relationship. It is in these moments of silence that one can begin to recognize their own strength and autonomy. The absence forces them to ask themselves, who am I when no one else is defining me? This question leads to a more grounded understanding of self-worth, one that is not dependent on the validation of another person, but instead on an internal sense of value. The period of absence and the self-reflection it triggers can become a transformative experience. It is an invitation to examine the self, both the strengths and the insecurities, and to redefine one's sense of worth. When a person's identity is anchored in their own self-awareness and self-respect, they can approach relationships from a position of wholeness, not need. This shift in perspective allows for a healthier, more balanced dynamic, where both individuals are able to offer each other something of value, not because they need each other to feel worthy, but because they recognize the mutual respect that comes from shared connection. When communication ceases, especially when it happens unexpectedly or without explanation, the reaction that often follows is a deep-seated insecurity. The absence of contact creates a space filled with uncertainty, and the mind naturally fills that space with the worst-case scenarios. Insecurity thrives in these moments. The person left without communication starts to question their place in the relationship, wondering if they are still valued, if they are still desired, or if their importance has faded. This insecurity is not just about the external silence, but about the internal turmoil that arises when someone begins to feel disconnected or unseen. Fear of loss is often a natural byproduct of this insecurity. When the usual patterns of interaction are interrupted, the individual's first instinct is to cling to what they know. The fear of losing the connection, the relationship, or even the emotional security that the other person provides begins to take root. It's a fear that is primal, one that emerges from a deep need to belong, to feel recognized, and to feel secure in the presence of another. The absence then acts as a trigger for this fear, awakening feelings of inadequacy and helplessness. The person may start to wonder if their absence has gone unnoticed or if it signifies the beginning of the end. This fear of being forgotten, replaced, or discarded can dominate their thoughts and lead to a heightened sense of anxiety. In this state of insecurity and fear, reactions can become erratic or irrational. The individual might seek constant reassurance, either through direct communication or subtle attempts to gauge the other person's feelings. There may be a compulsion to act, to reach out, to fill the silence with words or actions, all driven by the need for validation. But this response is not always healthy. It often stems from a place of desperation rather than understanding, and it reflects a fundamental fear of being left behind or abandoned. The fear of loss can manifest in many ways. Some may respond by becoming clingy, trying to reassert their place in the relationship through excessive attention or demands for commitment. Others may retreat, choosing to protect themselves by withdrawing even further, afraid that any action they take will make the situation worse. The person experiencing fear and insecurity may also try to manipulate the situation, perhaps by playing games or withdrawing their own affection in an attempt to provoke a reaction. These behaviors often come from a desire to regain control, to prove that they are still needed, still loved, or still irreplaceable. This insecurity and fear of loss highlight a deeper issue, a lack of emotional independence. When someone's sense of security is so closely tied to another person's presence or attention, their emotional balance becomes fragile. In these moments of silence, where communication is halted or less frequent, the person is forced to confront the fact that their emotional well-being is being outsourced. They may not have developed the internal resources necessary to feel whole or secure on their own. The absence of the other person reveals just how much of their emotional stability is rooted in external validation rather than internal strength. This cycle of insecurity and fear of loss is a deeply human experience, one that is often difficult to break free from. However, it is also an opportunity for growth. It calls attention to the need for emotional self-sufficiency, for the development of a sense of worth that is not dependent on the approval or attention of others. When a person can find security within themselves, the fear of loss begins to lose its grip, and they can approach relationships with a healthier, more balanced perspective. They no longer need the constant reassurance to feel worthy, and the relationship can shift from one of dependence to one of mutual respect and understanding. When communication stops, whether intentionally or as a result of circumstances, the true measure of commitment in a relationship is put to the test. Relationships are often built on a foundation of regular interaction, emotional support, and shared attention. But when that interaction is interrupted, the responses that follow reveal much about the depth of the commitment each person feels toward the other. The absence forces a person to confront not just their feelings for the other, but the strength and stability of their own commitment. At the heart of any meaningful relationship lies the expectation of mutual effort, understanding, and reliability. When communication is consistent, it often feels like a natural, steady rhythm. But when that rhythm is disrupted, it can throw everything into question. The person on the receiving end of the silence may initially feel confused or anxious, unsure of where they stand. However, how they react to this silence speaks volumes about their level of commitment. A person who is truly committed to the relationship will recognize the pause in communication not as a signal to retreat or react impulsively, but as an opportunity for growth or reflection. They understand that silence does not necessarily equate to abandonment, and that the strength of their relationship is not measured by the frequency of communication, but by the depth of trust and mutual respect. Commitment, in its truest form, is not dependent on constant reassurance. It is rooted in a more stable, unwavering connection that can withstand periods of distance or uncertainty. When someone is truly committed, they recognize that relationships go through natural cycles where closeness ebbs and flows, and that these periods of space do not diminish the bond they share. Rather than allowing fear or frustration to dominate their response, they may choose to reflect, give the other person the space they need, or even use the time apart to reevaluate how they themselves can be a better partner. Their commitment is demonstrated through patience, understanding, and a willingness to navigate through difficult moments with emotional maturity. On the other hand, when a person's commitment is superficial or rooted in insecurity, the absence can lead to confusion, anxiety, or defensive reactions. A person who is not as emotionally invested might react with frustration or resort to manipulative behaviors to regain control over the situation. They might demand answers, seek to pressure the other person back into contact, or behave in ways that are driven more by fear of loss than by a genuine desire for growth or understanding. For someone whose commitment is shallow, the absence of communication becomes a crisis rather than a moment of reflection. Their response often reveals that their attachment to the relationship is based more on immediate emotional fulfillment or validation than on a deeper, more resilient bond. The test of commitment is also about recognizing the difference between emotional dependency and a partnership based on mutual respect and trust. True commitment does not mean that one partner is responsible for constantly reassuring or proving their affection. Instead, it's an understanding that both people are capable of handling periods of silence or distance without the relationship falling apart. It's the trust that when the communication resumes, it will be stronger, clearer, and more grounded in the understanding that both individuals can grow separately and together. In moments of silence, the relationship is tested not by the absence of words, but by the strength of the emotional connection that underpins it. The true test of commitment lies in the ability to handle the absence with grace, patience, and a belief in the enduring value of the relationship, even in the face of uncertainty. When communication halts, particularly in a close or intimate relationship, an often unspoken shift occurs in the power dynamics between the individuals involved. Communication itself is a powerful tool. It is a primary means of asserting presence, reinforcing connection, and demonstrating care. But when one person stops texting, calling, or reaching out, the balance of power within the relationship subtly changes. The absence itself becomes a tool, a force that forces both parties to confront their positions within the relationship. The person who ceases communication suddenly has control over the flow of interaction, and this change can evoke a range of responses from the other person. For the individual who has stopped communicating, this shift in power can feel empowering, though it is often unconscious. By taking a step back, they momentarily disrupt the established patterns of the relationship. They are no longer offering constant emotional validation, but rather choosing to step into a position of silence. In doing so, they assert an influence over the emotional state of the other person. The one left in the silence may begin to wonder why the communication stopped, whether they have done something wrong, or whether the other person still cares. These questions leave them in a state of emotional uncertainty, and it is within this uncertainty that power plays out. The individual left in the silence may experience a profound shift in their sense of control. They were previously accustomed to a steady exchange of communication, which created a sense of stability. Now, with the other person's absence, they are forced to navigate the relationship without the usual feedback. This void can feel disorienting, and their attempts to regain control might lead them to act in ways that seek to restore the old dynamic. They may send multiple messages, become more insistent, or pressure the other person for an explanation. These reactions are often a result of the need to regain equilibrium and reassert control over the emotional flow that has been disrupted. At the same time, this shift in communication patterns can also expose deeper insecurities about the relationship. When one person stops initiating contact, it raises questions about attachment and dependence. The fear of losing control over the relationship, of not being able to influence the other person's actions, becomes more pronounced. The individual who is used to receiving attention and communication might feel as though they are losing their place in the other person's life. This fear of loss can lead to behaviors designed to reassert their position, sometimes using manipulation, guilt, or passive-aggressive tactics to provoke a response. They may act in ways that test the limits of the other person's commitment or emotional availability in an attempt to regain a sense of control over the emotional landscape. This dynamic, however, is not sustainable in the long run. Power struggles based on emotional manipulation or attempts to control the other person can erode the foundation of trust and mutual respect that relationships need to thrive. True emotional connection requires mutual understanding and a balance of power that is rooted in respect and care, not in dominance or the need to control. The moment one party begins to use absence or silence as a means of control, the relationship begins to shift away from cooperation and understanding toward imbalance and uncertainty. The dynamics of power and control in relationships are delicate. Communication, when used mindfully, can foster connection and mutual understanding. However, when either party attempts to control the flow of communication through silence or manipulation, it distorts the balance of the relationship. Both individuals in a relationship must be willing to engage in honest, open communication and be conscious of how power is exercised, whether consciously or unconsciously. The absence of communication should not be seen as a tool to manipulate or control, but as a moment for introspection and growth, both individually and as a couple. When communication stops, it often feels like a moment of crisis, a period filled with uncertainty and discomfort. Yet, beneath the surface of this silence lies an opportunity for profound growth, both for individuals and for the relationship itself. The absence of regular communication forces a person to confront their own feelings, needs, and expectations, and in doing so, They are given the chance to deepen their understanding of themselves and their connection with the other person. For one, the silence creates space for self-reflection. When communication is frequent, it is easy to become reliant on the feedback and validation of the other person. But when that feedback stops, there is no immediate source of reassurance. This absence forces the individual to turn inward, to reflect on their own thoughts and feelings without the distraction of external input. In these moments of silence, people are given the chance to explore what they truly want from the relationship, and perhaps more importantly, what they want for themselves. Without the constant exchange of words, they are encouraged to examine their emotional needs and how they have been met, or perhaps unmet, in the past. This introspection often leads to a clearer sense of self-awareness and personal growth. This period of absence also offers an opportunity to develop emotional independence. Many relationships, especially those marked by frequent communication, can create a sense of emotional dependence on the other person. The desire for constant attention or reassurance can unintentionally place an unhealthy burden on the relationship. When communication halts, the person is forced to manage their own emotions, to find ways to comfort themselves and maintain their sense of balance without relying on the other person's presence. This can be a challenging experience, but it is one that encourages personal strength and emotional resilience. By learning to handle the silence and uncertainty without collapsing into panic or desperation, individuals can cultivate a deeper sense of self-sufficiency and confidence. The absence provides an opportunity to reassess the dynamics of the relationship. Communication is a key element of any relationship, but it is not the sole factor in determining its value. Silence can reveal the true nature of the bond between two people. It exposes whether the connection is based on genuine understanding, mutual respect, and emotional depth, or whether it was primarily reliant on external markers like attention and frequent interaction. In the absence of constant communication, both individuals can take a step back and evaluate the relationship from a more detached perspective. This reflection can help them determine whether their needs are being met, whether they are offering enough to the other person, and whether the relationship is aligned with their long-term values and goals. The opportunity for growth also extends to the relationship itself. Just as the absence can lead to individual growth, it can also catalyze growth in the way both individuals relate to each other. When communication is restored, there is a chance for the relationship to evolve in a more mature direction. If both individuals have taken the time to reflect on their own emotional needs and their role in the relationship, they may return with a clearer understanding of how to communicate more effectively, how to address conflict, and how to meet each other's needs in a healthier way. The silence, when navigated thoughtfully, can lead to a deeper, more authentic connection built on greater emotional maturity and mutual respect. In this way, the opportunity for growth arises not just from enduring the silence, but from using it as a tool for reflection, emotional growth, and relationship development. When approached with patience and introspection, the absence of communication can become a powerful catalyst for positive change. In conclusion, the silence that emerges when communication stops serves as both a challenge and an opportunity for growth. It tests the strength of the individual's emotional resilience, their sense of self-worth, and the depth of their commitment to the relationship. While insecurity and fear may initially arise, these moments of absence also provide the chance for self-reflection, emotional independence, and a reassessment of the relationship's true dynamics. Through this process, individuals have the opportunity to confront their own needs and desires, recognize their emotional strengths, and gain clarity about their values and the role they play in their relationships. Ultimately, the absence of communication is not merely a void, but a powerful space for transformation, where both individuals and the relationship itself can evolve into something more mature, balanced, and genuine. The key lies in approaching the silence with patience, introspection, and the understanding that growth often comes in the most unexpected of forms.